I read something on the 350.org website a few days ago written by one of the environmental organizers there. Climate change is not an issue among other social issues. Climate change is a global crisis that impacts the fundamental conditions surrounding every major economic and transnational justice issue that we care about. That rings true for me. The evidence is in. Our planet is warming due mainly to human activities which have increased the amount of carbon pollution in our air. An overwhelming majority of scientists accept that conclusion. And a majority of the American public recognizes that conclusion and supports action to address this rapidly growing threat. This forum this morning is intended, one, to help us improve our understanding of the crisis, and two, help us identify and engage in effective ways to address it. I generally detest long introductions. My impression is that they are often intended to stroke the ego of the speaker or to show how important this audience is that we have such an important speaker willing to address us. Probably the latter. Perhaps I'm doing both, though, this morning, but I want every person here to be acutely aware that you have a role to play in addressing this crisis, and that our speaker has the knowledge, the experience to help us understand this crisis and how to work towards solutions of it. Steve is a native-born Palo Alton, a graduate of the school. You can ask him for directions if you can't find something that you want to get to. After Pali High, he earned a bachelor's degree at University of California, Santa Barbara. Then later got into a rut and just kept on earning master's degrees. It took him 3 times to realize that maybe he should do something else. But he got a master's degree in business, one in software, and then one in transportation at Columbia, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and UC Berkeley. Finally came home to cap it off. Steve's project history includes Google self-driving cars, ultra-personal rapid transit, which means self-driving electric vehicle transit, I think, smartphone instant ride sharing, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's study on transforming office parks into transit villages, numerous other studies or projects. He's made presentations to numerous professional and governmental conferences. If you go to his website, cities21.org, I warn you, you risk spending hours following an interesting link to some other interesting link, but it's time well spent. I think it's important to note that Steve took the initiative to reach out to us. He's a volunteer activist. He works with 350.org, and he's undertaking outreach to ethically driven communities in our area to solicit participation in broad-based community-wide efforts to address the challenge of climate change. It's a privilege and an honor to introduce Steve Raney.
Does everybody, so this is Jerry Grass over here protesting on behalf of the climate. Hey, Jerry. So here's a question for the audience to start out. If we have a protest action coming up with Jerry, how many of you would be on behalf of the climate, how many of you would be willing to join Jerry? And as part of this talk, we'll try to inspire more people to. Sure. That's right. It's a firm commitment. So some of us locally at 350.org are working on outreach to what we call morally strong communities and congregations to try to get more activism, more people involved. And to review, Suds Jane came and presented in May of last year. How many people came to that talk here? Okay, just to review, so his topic was climate denialism and why we need a carbon tax. And some key points he made was he talked about Coke industry and Exxon using tobacco industry tactics to fuzz up this obvious issue and create denial of the science. And then he gave great details on climate science. And his calls to action were to join the Citizens Climate Lobby, and they work to pass a national carbon fee and dividend, which is economically progressive, so it is beneficial to low-income folks. And I want to reinforce Suds' call to action, because anything we can do for the climate is great right now, and and all the different organizations and things you can do all contribute very nicely. And just the challenge is we need about 100 times more people doing that. So it's the big issue is growing the movement. He also recommended folks read Merchants of Doubt about denial of climate science. How many people read that book? Okay. So that's what Suds was talking about. And then today I'm going to focus more on tactics and my amateur version of the political science of this. I'm not a professional public policy person or a political scientist. So this is relatively short PowerPoint, 4 slides to talk about the context of what the end game looks like to protect the world's climate, to have success in our endeavor. And then I've got a 6-slide pitch to this community of humanists to have an ongoing climate effort, everybody get involved, to collaborate with other communities and congregations in the movement to grow numbers, and to collaborate with the climate groups, 350, CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby, Go Fossil Free, etc. So now we're into the context. So in California, we're really lucky because we have this great set of public policies that is our greenhouse gas reduction machine. And it is in place, and it works, and we can make it work even more. So think about our public policy machine in California as a bunch of gears all working together with different bits of the policy in it, right? So it's very comprehensive. You have to address multiple things. So the main law is AB 32, and then the biggest gear in our machine that can reduce the most carbon is cap and trade. And it's actually been in place and operational for some months now. But there's other parts of it. And in this public policy undergoes a process where every 5 years it's updated. It's kind of a living, breathing machine as we keep evolving it. So, imagine if we were in Texas, there's just no way you could pass this set of laws. I mean, so we're in this unique progressive place where both chambers of the legislature and the last 2 governors have been pro-climate in a way that's really willing to do some ambitious things. Okay, and there's just not a lot of places in the world that are like California that way. And if you think about this machine, there's a knob on it. And you can reduce just a little bit of carbon or a whole lot. So Exxon wants us to have just a little. And then the current setting is faster than the rest of the world, which is great, but we still need to go faster than that. And then from a morally strong standpoint, we'd actually want to crank it all the way up to have really reduce a lot of carbon right away, as fast as possible. We're really lucky to have such a great state government in California. And if you look at the staffs and in the different departments, they're all working well together and collaborating, so there's no stupidity among, fiefdoms within the government. And the legislators the legislators have been just really great about putting this legislative package together. And yet, even in super progressive California, the public policy package is still fragile. More battles are ahead to try to weaken it. So when we think about Californians, they have a kind of a superficial wish to protect the climate, but they don't want to be inconvenienced. So while they want to protect the climate, they don't necessarily want to increase the gas tax by 25 cents a gallon, which would reduce demand. And 75% 3.5% of California voters are opposed to raising the gas tax. So it's a really tricky thing. Oh, I gotta be, sorry. Okay, and let's contrast California to the United States and the UN. Okay, as opposed to having Congress in line, actually, Congress is completely gridlocked, and that's going to be that way for the foreseeable future. And it appears you can only pass incremental legislation, but not game-changing legislation, which is really, it's kind of a whole new paradigm to protect the climate. So if you think of Obamacare was kind of an incremental approach to healthcare reform, as opposed to a universal Medicare would have really provided healthcare to everyone. Okay, and so if you think about the policy package needed to protect the climate, it's something big like the New Deal or what we did to win World War II or the Civil Rights Movement. So it's game-changing, it's not incremental. And there have been no game-changing laws passed in Congress in the past few decades. Okay, so there's a cartoon there showing gridlock. And so it's really tricky to envision how to just have Congress somehow wise up and do the right thing, right? It's not going to happen. And then at the international level, the last UN climate conference, the Council of Parties 19, U.S. was blamed for stalling progress there. So what strategy is going to work to protect the world's climate? So I contend we have to protect California's progressive policy, then we have to spread it to the U.S., and once the U.S. is in line, then the rest of the world is going to follow, because the U.S. is holding climate protection up. So, but given this congressional gridlock, what tactics are going to work? And is there some empirical evidence that would give us confidence that these tactics are going to work in the face of very well-financed opposition from Exxon and Koch? So there's this book, Why Civil Resistance Works, The Strategic Logic of Nonviolent Conflict. So it looks at things like the Iranian Revolution and some of these uprisings that overthrew governments. And it's got a data set of how the nonviolent citizens movements succeeded or failed. So the evidence shows that if you only get 3.5% of the population to participate, then 80% of those movements achieve systemic change. Because if you have 3.5%, then you have a bunch of other people who are quietly supporting the movement as well. And in the book, the author points out that it's important to discredit the opposition, which in this case is the fossil fuel industry. And so you want to stigmatize the Koch brothers and Exxon, and you want to apply sustained economic pressure to the fossil fuel industry. And 3.5% of American population is only 11 million Americans. That's all we need to protect the world. But we would expect very strong countermeasures from the fossil fuel industry in this battle that's coming up. So envision a discussion among the humanists with very bleak moral construct that kind of helps elucidate some good discussion, to facilitate discussion. So let's pick something like, let's look at African kids in 2025 affected by climate change. And this is based on the book Overheated, which looks at the impacts of climate change. And Andrew Guzman, the author, is a Berkeley professor, somewhat accessible. And he actually there's a YouTube of him speaking in Palo Alto. So each community member here can save 10 of these cute African skinny boys in 2025. Okay, and as Guzman explains, that these boys are subsistence peoples, just barely getting by. It's a pretty precarious life. And the threats to kill them off are not getting enough calories, the water isn't clean, overpopulation, bad sanitation, healthcare issues, and then you have armed factions rising up with guns. And climate is what's called a threat multiplier, so it makes all this worse. Okay, and so in Guzman's projection of the impacts, he says it's going to hit Africa subsistence peoples first. It's not going to hit Silicon Valley. But in 2025, millions of Africans are going to start dying if we don't do something. So the crisis for Africa is coming up pretty quick. So for a discussion topic, imagine considering, would I put up with the following set of things if I could save those 10 skinny African boys? So would I put up with $9 a gallon gas, going with a diet that's 90% vegan, taking fewer showers per week, 2 showers per week, so being a little stinky, and not flying? And would you make this trade-off based on a moral basis if you can save 10 kids? What do you think? Okay, and also if you can envision, you know, human psychology, you know, humans are kind of silly, right? And so it's hard for us to grasp the future impacts of climate change, but if you can imagine if we actually time traveled to Africa in 2025, saw millions of African kids dying, then if we could time travel back, then our actions would change, right? If we could viscerally experience what's going to happen, then there'd be no doubt that things would completely change. And even if you sent the Koch brothers to 2025 in Africa, they would come back and they'd change their story, right? They're just kind of stubborn about it. So that was the context. And now we're on to 6 slides with the pitch. And so the request for your consideration as a community is to have an ongoing discussion. So every member spends a few hours per year thinking about climate and possibly taking some action. Again, there's Jerry at work here. And we're trying to prevent Sandy and fires and, you know, all the devastation of climate. And so the ask would be to take 4 collaborative actions over 2 years, start with something small and fun, grow from there. And so if we can envision how this all could play out, the result in the end of 2015 will be passing strong federal climate legislation. So 11 million Americans all collaborate and demand climate policies, laws are passed. And I think it's interesting to consider, is this like the 60s civil rights movement? You see some of the pictures of blacks and whites protesting together here. And is that picture inspiring to you or scary to you? Because it's nonviolent civil disobedience, but, you know, it's kind of in your face. And in this success scenario, the golden rule, do unto others, and especially considering doing unto others that are future generations and other species, trumps the invisible hand of capitalism, which is basically being selfish in the short-term perspective. Right? So, okay, so that's the scenario, how it ends up, and then the community could start with an action in a couple months and collaborate with 300 people. So say you got 50 members from 6 different entities. You might have to work with some Quakers or Unitarians, or, you know, Episcopalians are obviously pretty hard to work with. That's kind of an issue, but But if you could get 300 morally strong people, then that forms a really potent local political force where you can get things done and it's very newsworthy. So I would propose for first actions, you find a city council ally in what city you're working with, and then you try to get a couple actions done. So, and in support of the city council advancing that, you would write some letters, and you might show up and make public comment. So take some hours of your day to sit through a boring city council meeting in the evening. And a couple of interesting things to take action on is this dump the pump effort, where a city can pass an ordinance requiring this sticker on all the gas pump handles. And so it says, warning, the state of California has determined that global warming caused by greenhouse gases poses a serious threat to the economic well-being, public health, natural resources, and the environment of California. So that's the dump the pump effort, and there's kind of a template to follow to get that passed in a city, and a city has the power to do it. And a second action, say for City Palo Alto or Mountain View or Los Altos, wherever you're living in, is to get City Council to pass a memorandum urging the state pension system, CalPERS, to divest investments in fossil fuels. And so to just have a number of cities put more pressure on CalPERS to divest. And again, that's part of sustained economic pressure on the opposition, the fossil fuel industry. So so the first action might be in spring, and the second action towards the end of the year would grow and be bigger. So envision it being the first action squared, so 36 entities, 2,000 people. And then the third action might be in spring of 2015, bigger still. And then again, you win in November 2015. So you grow really big fast. So also for your potential discussion, consider these 5 questions. So, is climate change and impacts from climate change the world's biggest problem? If it's not the world's biggest problem, like if something else is the biggest problem, then you probably don't want to work on climate change. So let me just take a show of hands right now. How many people agree that climate change is the biggest problem facing humanity right now? Okay. So you can imagine kind of having a good discussion on that. And then another question is, should the humanist community undertake some bold activism? And then a question would be, how many people within this room would participate in that action, and then how many friends could be recruited to this effort as well? And another question is there an effective action with a high chance of success? So the proposal previously, is that the right thing to do, or is there something smarter to do? And you might ask, is this kind of a fun, mischievous, clever, lawful action that's going to have a good impact? And then there's a question of, are things going to go back to normal the next day? So I know sort of Paul and Jerry are willing to go to jail for this cause, but I'm not sure everybody else is of the same level of fervor. But you want to have that be a consideration. You don't necessarily want to snooker people into ending up in jail the next day. Because then kind of next time you're recruiting for the November event, it's not as easy. And then I think in all these things, is social justice well considered? So envision low-income folks in East Palo Alto. How do they play in this? How are they served by this? Always keep coming back to social justice and low-income people. And so that was the pitch, and we're open for discussion and your insights and thoughts right now. So again, the ask is for the humanist community to form a climate effort, collaborate with other entities, and collaborate with some of the climate groups as well. So for questions, do I?
Okay, no, I'll circulate a microphone, and we raise our hands, and I will try to pick on you in the order you put it. I raise hands up, so I don't know who went first, so I'm going to just go around at the beginning and just knock off the group. So.
I'll make it easy for you. So I guess my question is this. Given that people in the Western world consume vastly more resources than people in the Third World, it would seem like any kind of effort we made to reduce our consumption would best be served by reducing our population. I'm curious why that's kind of dropped off the radar as an issue in broad environmentalism.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, right? And this problem is so much harder with 7 billion people right now than on carbon footprint. I think a sustainable human population is more on the order of 3 billion. So if we could, you just imagine with the governments and the religious beliefs how hard it's going to be to create a gradual descent on population. But if we can, that's just going to make our life so much easier. And my concern is when you keep population high, then you end up with, 1 billion people per century dying off. It's sad that way. I follow like the Population Media Center, and I think their work is really good. But you're right, it's not in the discourse like it should be. I mean, it's a top issue.
Hi, Andrea Dory. I was wondering, there's 2 things I wanted to say real quickly. Nader sent out something in the May. I still listen to him because he's really a troublemaker, you know, par excellence.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Love him. But anyway, he said something out. He said, what happened with making the minimum wage for Democrats not the number one issue? He's saying that he thinks this is what it is. He said he counted up 27,000 people. That's all it took. And I'm thinking, you know, I wanted to ask you if you believe that. And then just one more comment. California is facing a drought. To get the attention of people so that the Democrats are now paying attention to that particular thing. But while you're trying to get that fixed, let me ask this. You think California is concerned about environment and all of that because we are facing our third year of a drought, and I think there is a really bloody battle coming up for the water and the excess water, and I think who's going to win is agribusiness. And I'm saying that as a family farm, organic farmer.
Test 1 2 3. Test 1 2 3. Test. 27,000. Only 27,000 people could pass the minimum wage. Could get the attention. So my sense is that to win the climate battle, the one implication is that the fossil fuel industry has $10 trillion worth of proven reserves that they're going to have to take that $10 trillion value and make it zero. Okay, so there's 10 trillion reasons why they're going to fight this. So it's one of the most powerful oppositions that's ever been trying to faced. So that's why I think, you know, the Congress is serving the needs of the fossil fuel industry and not humanity, right? And that's pretty clear to everyone, right? And so it's, in essence, 11 million people, 11 million Americans is trying to get to the level where there's an equal amount of people power to match that vast $10 trillion fossil fuel industry power. So that's the theory behind it. I think it would be, I would wish that there was an easier route to go that required less people, you know, and you could say, oh, the Congress is just going to become rational all of a sudden and work in the interest of the common person and future generations. But I think that's unrealistic. So it's kind of a sad state. And so in terms of the overturning Citizens United, I think also one of the things that happens is if you get to the political power to pass strong federal climate legislation, then you also get to do the political reforms because you've got that much political power and you're saying, well, never again are we going to get in this stupid situation. I think that to build a coalition that's 11 million people, you probably want to bring in the unions and have some specific policy points that come with that. You certainly want to consider bringing in Occupy and having some things that hit their hot buttons. So you want to sort of figure out what your coalition is going to be and what things you want to give to them that still gives you a broad appeal, right? So you want to sort of do a balancing act on that. But you want to sort of have the minimum policy package possible to get to where you want to do with 11 million. And you're in the face of so much apathy and people are so busy and doing other things. It's tricky. And, you know, I think, you know, on sort of natural disasters and droughts, in some sense, kind of a hope that they're kind of like really stick it to us, because, you know, it's like Sandy and Katrina and all these things. You know, it's just kind of shrugged off. You know, at some point, you know, certainly by 2025, you know, if you have millions of Africans dying off, then everybody's going to say, oh, we got to do something about it. You know, it's too late, but, you know, they're at least going to clue in. And the question is, can you have some short-term disasters that change the political dynamic? So every drought really helps. I'm pulling for it.
All right. Oh, Jesus.
More polarized guy. Yeah, that one they'll notice.
You hope so. I'm just shocked that, you know, other things haven't. You know, it seems like, duh.
Hi.
Where's the microphone?
Microphone's here.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm sort of an engineer, and I try to take things rationally, so I'm probably have less fervor for this issue than some people here. But I want to be intellectually honest about this and ask a question. So let's assume that, 100% humans have had, major influence on the climate, and that's really bad. My question for you is, what is the scientific evidence that a certain amount of reduction in CO2 emissions, something that's actually pragmatically possible given the geopolitical climate, what is the science that that amount of reduction is actually going to fix the problem or make a serious dent in the problem of water rising and stuff like that?
Right.
So getting away from the tactics a bit to the science.
Right. So I would point to is something that's pretty readable, Andrew Guzman's book, Overheated, which looks at the projected impacts. And, it's one reasonable scenario. It's not the way it's going to play out. But he's looking at 2 degrees Celsius average surface temperature rise over 100 years. And he's saying, well, essentially, this is the best case scenario right now. And it's still really bad. So you'd have 300 million people die prematurely because of climate change this century. And what we're all trying to prevent now is the 4 degrees Celsius climate change. And there's some, forecasts on that. And, they're all going to be wrong, but they're, you could sort of see enough that it's pretty dire, right? And the thing that we're kind of concerned about is these cascading effects, where you hit a tipping point, and then all the all the methane that's trapped in the permafrost, comes out, and you go, oh shoot, it's really bad.
Isn't there also, though, a possibility that if 2 degrees is bad, are we sure that 4 degrees or 3 degrees is so much worse that it's worth the suffering to get down to 2 degrees?
Yeah, so I think you're basically trying to do almost an economic analysis where you're optimizing for future humanity and current humanity, and what brings about either the highest level of happiness or even the highest level of gross domestic product over 700 years. And the point is that if we can be inconvenienced now, then the future generations are so much better off. But 4 degrees Celsius to some people is a near extinction event. So it's really bad, right? And so 2 degrees Celsius, the record temperature in Palo Alto is probably going to be 12 to 16 degrees higher than our past record. Fahrenheit, right, yeah.
I'm also engineering background, and the 3.5 billion years ago, the carbon dioxide levels were 350,000 parts per million, and now we're worried about 400 parts per million. So I'm a little bit skeptical about some of that. But let's assume that that there is this pending problem. I've been looking into solutions, and I don't see where a tax is a solution. The solution involves a new energy source. It involves, of course, what you agreed to was population control. And when you talk about these possible tipping points, of runaway greenhouse effect, which it seems to me like there's going to be a solution that's going to be put out there that actually is the only solution to stop that. That's going to be very unpopular among environmentalists, and that's to spray sulfuric acid into the upper atmosphere over the next 100 years as a Plan B Band-Aid effect until these new technologies come online. And until we get space-based solar, space-based mirroring systems, and the ability to actually put a thermostat on the planet, essentially, geological thermal engineering for the entire planet. And I could support a carbon tax idea if all the money was put into research to come up with that new energy source or those new energy sources. But until you have a replacement energy source, people are going to go with whatever's cheapest, and oil's cheapest. So you have to have something that's better and cheaper than oil.
Right.
So I just want to throw those out there and see what your reaction is to all that stuff since we have some time here.
Yeah, exactly. So Sudge Jane's talk, which is on the Humanist web from May of last year, addressed geoengineering, so that's worth taking a look at. I'm not an expert on geoengineering. And then, so when we talk about pricing carbon, so we know from for instance, the U.S. transportation price elasticity of demand that if we get to $9 a gallon gas, then the consumption of transportation fossil fuel goes down by 28%. Okay, so if you raise the price high enough, then you force people to carpool more and to bike more and do other things like that. So we actually, we know how Americans work, and so we actually, there's a machine.
That's not the level that's going to fix it, though.
Right, that's it, right. So it's a step in the right direction. It's not, you're absolutely right, it's not sufficient. And so in California policymaking, you can imagine that there's a high bar to introducing facts and making good projections about the entire California economy, where the carbon is and how to crank that down. And you want to do it in the most cost-efficient way. And so I think California has done a relatively good job at it. I think the point about having a new revenue source that can be dedicated to innovation is not there yet, and you want to be basically picking from amongst these different proposals to have new energy sources and such, and you want to be making the right level of investment in those, and you want an objective, vetted process to make wise investments, knowing that maybe 1 out of 20 of these investments is going to work. You don't want to be throwing money at crazy stuff, but you do want to be trying to advance things because the new technologies can really make it easier, right? It can be more cost efficient. So you want to make the right policy trade-off there. I agree with that. And I want to stop on that.
Excuse me. I'm not a scientist. I'm a mathematician and logician. When 98% of the climatologists believe we have a serious problem with climate change, I think I'd be a jerk to challenge that because I just don't know. So I believe in going along with the experts. So I'm not interested in all these technical problems. I want to know, what are the experts saying? They're saying that the Earth is getting warmer, it's extremely dangerous, we have to do something about it. And the fossil fuels are the big problem. That's what the public needs to know. And I think that 98%, that's pretty impressive. And we have people who are not climate scientists who are challenging that. And I think that has to be made clear to the public. The public has to understand in their gut, this is what the experts are saying. It's like if 98% of the doctors saying I've got a serious illness, and 2% are saying don't worry about it, it's not serious, I'm going to go along with the 98%, right? And so we have people who are in Congress. I think it's ridiculous for them to be challenging this. So I think that, and I say it's important to educate the public about all this, and I'm kind of concerned that there's not enough education going on. That's an important component of all of this.
Well, and let me put a layer of amateur political science on top of that as well, in that I believe Newt Gingrich and John McCain understand that climate change is real, and that's not their issue. It's the politics and their backers in the fossil fuel industry and the mighty power of the fossil fuel industry that got them to change their position. So they actually understand the science. And that's the sad part, right? They're sort of saying, well, I need to get elected and I'm going to screw humanity, right? That was their calculus. It's pretty sad.
Yes, my background is mechanical engineering. I worked in aerospace and automotive, and did some work on electric and hybrid electric drive systems. And in any case, I want to respond to a few of these things on the population explosion problem that we have, which is one of the major problems. People are working on this. There's a particular organization I support called Room to Read. And what they do is they build schools in the poorest places on the planet and recruit young girls to become educated. And this seems to be, so far, the most effective way that we've found to reduce population growth and population explosion. And I have to say that if we were able to get all the women on the planet to postpone having the child they were going to have this year for a year, 2, 5 years, we'd have no more population explosion. In any case, with regard to the cap and trade versus carbon tax, I just want to make my comment on that, following the advice of Nobel laureate Burton Richter, former physics professor at Stanford, who's written a book which I have in my possession right here called Beyond Smoke and Mirrors, Climate Change and Energy in the 21st Century. Burton Richter suggests that we do use a carbon tax, and the way it would work is, and it's far more effective and far less subject to being manipulated by the oil companies, who will do everything they can to have their way, which is to burn every last drop of fossil fuels until every living thing on the planet is a charred cinder. And the way it would work is this: the carbon tax will be based on the amount of carbon that would be released to the atmosphere if the product being taxed is actually burned. So, but the providers of the fuel have to pay the tax, pay that fee before when they extract it from the ground. So tax will not be on carbon-free sources of energy, such as nuclear power, about which I might add there are a lot of myths. A lot of people don't understand that there is a good level of radiation which actually is safe, but you really don't have anything to worry about with today's nuclear power plants, because the background radiation that everybody gets is 10,000 times greater, according to the experts, 10,000 times, and Richter being one of them, 10,000 times greater than the amount of radiation you would receive from a nuclear power plant should you live next door to it. And I could go on about that, but there's a long list of desirable features about nuclear power, and that is exactly carbon-free once the plant is built. So, I'm sorry? Okay, so, and I could go on, but thanks.
I'm trying to form this to why climate change is the #1 issue. I was raised what they call nuns, so without religion. I believe sincerely, a strong belief, that we evolved on this planet as Homo sapiens without any cosmic plan or purpose. Since the scientific method came along about 400 years ago, I mean, you can blame the scientists for why we have this myth, because without the scientific method, we would have a billion population at most on this planet. We'd still be dying from smallpox and scarlet fever and all that other good stuff. So what I'm getting at, if we can't solve this, in some ways, I think people will say, well, no big problem if we all go extinct. I mean, most people that understand science know that most animals or most things have gone extinct on this planet. But we've taken away our opportunity to be something more than just another advanced primate. We take away a chance to be more than we are today. We have in near space unlimited resources. And, you know, capitalism likes unlimited resources. So what I'm saying is we've taken our chance to be what we can be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 generations from now, where we can solve most hunger problems and maybe learn to keep this population on this planet the 2.5, 3 billion people that should be, so that other animals can live on this planet too. That really pisses me off when we don't care about the other animals.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why I think it's so damn important. And I have a 1.5-year-old grandson, and it just scares me the kind of world he might be in at 60 or 70 years old. And a lot of people are going to be mad at America when they start starving to death in 25 years, or they're going to be mad at us. I'm going to try to blame the Canadians.
Yes. And, we have the potential to enter an age of enlightenment and really step it up a notch and how we interact with each other and our consideration for each other. And it's frustrating that we are so far from achieving that. Right? But it would be great to live in that society. Right?
Jerry Grass, I want to respond to some of the questions or other comments. If you go back and look at the Earth's history, there was a time when the CO2 was in the thousands instead of the hundreds, but humans weren't around at that time, and I don't think they could have been around at that time. Yeah, the temperature was pretty high too. That's a long story. I've been learning about that. We can talk about that later. Studies indicate that the cost of adapting, in other words, just letting the global warming happen and then trying to live with it, the cost of that is more than trying to prevent it. Alternative fuels are a little more expensive, but not a lot more expensive. A carbon tax would hasten the speed that we move from fossil fuels to alternatives. Yeah, there are people working on geoengineering, including SUDS, but I think SUDS will say, and I know most geoengineers will say, they hope they don't have to use it because it has potential side effects. The geoengineering work is being done sort of as a last resort, a Hail Mary pass, you want to think of it in those terms. Mark Jacobson, he's a professor at Stanford, says that we can go 100% renewable in the United States by 2030. I don't know what all the conditions are in there, but it's something to keep in mind. Oh yeah, in terms of the temperature difference, basically every degree higher makes life worse for us. It means more extreme weather, worse storms, and also less food is available. As far as people who are concerned about climate, like Republicans, George Shultz is concerned about it. He's one of the ones who started the risky business thing. And Bloomberg, the mayor of New York. And finally, rising sea levels is a problem for a lot of low-level nations, including Bangladesh, but also Tuvalu and Kiribati and Maldives and so forth.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you were saying you were hoping the community will get more involved. If people in the community or the community itself wanted to get more involved, what would they do? Would they just go to 350.org, or what steps can people take to get more involved if they want to? So I am a proponent of doing it within the humanist community. As you get together every Sunday, spending a few minutes every so often on it, sending emails around and organizing things, and then where you need some help from 350 or CCL, reach out to them. But I'm a big fan of using the morally strong communities, reaching out to other humanists and some of the other faiths, and trying to build numbers that way. So that's what I would advise. And think about how do you get 300 people sending letters to Palo Alto City Council, which would be unprecedented, right? You can really actually move some things locally and have an impact. And I think being morally strong is an interesting position to take, because you can begin to appeal to some of the southern states and the conservatives there, because you're coming from a somewhat similar place. And so positioning yourself as, I'm kind of like you in a way, and here's what we came up with after a thorough study.
So Steve, the fellow in the back that was, running a risk analysis on, investing now versus dealing with the consequences later, said that carbon tax wasn't really a best approach, and you've pointed out that a 75-cent or 25-cent tax is opposed by 75% of the people. And yet we're kind of in the process of implementing over the next few years here in California a tax and dividend kind of an approach, where all the taxes that we might be spending for our carbon fuels go into a fund that gets funneled back to us as a check either every 3 to 12 months kind of a thing, and then we can spend that money either to continue buying that carbon fuel or we can invest it in something else. And that's one thing that we're doing at the state level. At the local level, again, we're talking about people having resistance to a tax, and I'm wondering because in Milpitas, we have a lot of corporate products coming in that are bad for the environment or bad for people or bad for people's thinking, whatever. There's lots of garbage coming in. Right. And I'm thinking that one of the things we could do is put a 1 or 2% tax on, for example, gasoline, because I know that there are stations right across the street from one another in Milpitas that have price differentials of at least 2%. On an ongoing basis kind of a thing. So it would seem to me that we should be able to throw on a 1 or 2% pollution fee for carbon fuels in Milpitas. It could pass at a 50% level because the money is going into the general fund to be used to backfill the fire officers and police officers that we've had to cut over the last years. Does that sound like it's going to be more viable than the 25-cent tax per gallon that you're saying doesn't seem to be politically viable?
Yeah, and I'd also say in California, so as the cap and trade is extended to transportation fuels in a couple years, and then as the price goes up, then if you're at a $100 a ton price, that translates into $1 at the pump increase, okay? And so the Exxon and Coke and the California Chamber of Commerce make this argument that, it really is lousy to have your gas prices increase, which is true under that scheme. And so it's a powerful argument that you have to combat. And the only way to kind of combat it is with a kind of a big, strong moral argument that's saying it's better for future generations. Okay, and furthermore, the California climate lobbyists have said, well, we actually preferred to do a different scheme, but cap and trade was all we could get here in the most progressive state in the US, right? So again, trying to even build stronger political capability in California. And so it's clear that a fee and dividend scheme where the average schmo comes out financially better is going to be a lot more winning. Right, and it's going to have mass appeal as fossil fuel industry is not going to like it, but the average voter is not going to be inconvenienced as much, right? So it's going to take us a lot farther politically in the long run, right? Definitely.
I'm David Harris. I have Parkinson's disease, so I may speak slowly or have some trouble at some point. But back in the 1980s, roughly, there was a mass of political movements saying that we should not do nuclear power plants anymore. And at the time, it seemed like a reasonable thing to do. We get fossil fuels and burn those as needed, and problem solved. But the circumstances have changed. The need to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere so it doesn't act as a greenhouse gas is becoming very intense. And I think that we need to be looking again at nuclear power plants, which have become safer since the 1980s. They've become cheaper if you manufacture them in factories and deliver them on trains or trucks. The whole position of nuclear power and our feelings toward it need to be reviewed, because there have been changes. We've got a group over at the Unitarian Church that has been looking into this, and there are some particularly interesting technologies that we are aware of. But just broadly, I think it's important that we who love the air and the planet give a new look at a way that is cheaper and less polluting and therefore more acceptable than the nuclear power plants of the 1980s.
Yeah, and so James Hansen, our climate hero from NASA, is pro-nuke. And then Mark Jacobson, our climate hero from Stanford, says you can get to 100% renewables without nukes. So there's expert thinking out there that is in conflict. And was it Brian Habersley from the local Sierra Club chapter said, actually, the discussion is interesting, but there's no nuclear plants in the pipeline right now in the U.S., and it takes so incredibly long to entitle them that it's not much of an issue for Sierra Club right now because they don't see a lot of nuclear coming on rapidly unless sort of something happens to speed up the process. And certainly I think we'd all agree that if we were going to build nuclear, we would want to build it with the next generation, much safer and much smarter than the Fukushima design, right? I mean, we all agree that, right?
Okay, methane. Hi. I came in a little late, but did you mention anything about methane? Because the methane gas is actually worse than carbon. And it's mostly coming from our cow industry. So if you could comment on that, and I'm doing my part to lower methane by not eating beef anymore. So I would suggest everyone else too, because methane is what, 3 times worse? Huh? 30 times worse, and we keep devastating our land with all these, with the cattle industry and eating way too much beef that we don't really need. Anyways.
Right.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say, so if you imagine we weren't humans, but there was 6.8 billion Vulcans, right? Is it a coolly logical species as opposed to humans who are kind of so dodgy and have trouble thinking? I think that we would have very high prices for meat. You know, I think there's no doubt about that in terms of what would have already been enacted to protect the climate. I think the Vulcans would definitely agree with that. So higher prices to reduce demand and just the adoption socially of veganism would really help. And on methane, we're really concerned about tipping points hitting, like with the permafrost and so forth. It's kind of scary.
Okay. Hello? Oh, stop fiddling with that thing. We've had everybody we have nothing but repeats left. So is there anyone that would like to get a question in, because we're running out of time, that has not spoken yet? Okay, we're going to go to the repeats.
Oh, well, a major part of the problem, as you said, is that the fossil fuel industry donates money to Congress. You might say really bribes Congress,
right,
to deny this issue. But what about other major industries with big bucks who are not making money from fossil fuels? I wonder whether, I mean, aren't they concerned about they could donate money on the other side? And so what about that?
Yeah, it would be great to get some of the firms that don't really have the fossil fuel conflicts of interest to take up a really strong advocacy position there. But consider that, like, if you consider Google as a progressive company, and you might not, but certainly a company that's concerned about climate change, in their enterprise division, you know, Exxon's got, and Mobil and Chevron have a bunch of their products. So there are salespeople within these semi-neutral looking organizations that actually care about not making big industries upset with them. So there are some sort of more subtle conflicts with all that, because, you know, the economy is all interchanged, right? So it would be nice, and, you know, you certainly think of the like the vast majority of a lot of these companies, like IBM, their employees are so pro-climate, it's not even funny. But, you know, as a corporate standpoint, you know, you're run by a board of directors and your job is to maximize short-term profits. And so it's hard to be a CEO and take a leadership position that's really ambitious and progressive on climate when you're reporting to the board of directors as opposed to if you're reporting to your employees who are on board. So it's an interesting dynamic. But yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there. And it would be nice because, again, you're fighting this $10 trillion battle against the fossil fuel industry. So some big, powerful entities and these billionaires like Tom Steyer can really play an important role.
Okay, this is going to be the last question, so everybody knows. And then try to keep it fairly quick because we're approaching the hour.
I'll make it a positive comment then, since it's the last one. Jerry Grass has some flyers that have some other sources of information. And I'd like to, and he has a supply, just pick them up from him. In the news a day or so ago, I saw that Tim Cook, the Apple top executive, was attacked in board shareholders meeting about whether or not they were spending money because of these do-gooder activities rather than bottom line, and tried to get a proposal passed in the stockholders meeting that they would not deal with sustainability of the environment or those other frivolous things. And Tim Cook responded quite angrily to it. My point in this, where we can, we should support corporate executives where they're doing the right thing. You know, a note to Tim Cook wouldn't hurt, or others where they come up, or in Google or whoever it is. Oh, and let me just add here a big thank you to Steve for this presentation this morning, and we'll be working on it.
Thanks for having me.